Okay, here goes. Hello, my name is Louis Melendez. Before I begin, I would like to say that this event is made possible by the support from the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislation and administrated by the Arts Council of Wyoming County. The purpose of this podcast presentation is in compliance to a contractual agreement in respect to the decentralization grant received in 2021. Also to share my thoughts and invite you to know how I paint. Art is something that I've always enjoyed. What I know is that you gotta put in your 10,000 hours. My opening statement is that we live in an age of technology whereby knowledge is on everyone's fingertips. As we are surrounded by temptation, entertained by talent on a global scale, we often miss the simple things in life. I also prepared a slideshow presentation to illustrate a process in which I hope will inspire you as well. My passion is and will always be to create art without compromise. As I think of it, many of us artists who work at home do so in hope that their next work will be their best one yet. And with that, I encourage you to let your art express your passion. With that said, I would like to add that my passion for art requires an arsenal amount of knowledge when using tools of the trade that can work for any age group, including those who may not feel comfortable due to their lack of confidence. And yet, when it comes to art, we are compelled to explore the essence of beauty that periodically emerge in our culture, serving our cultural appetite, creating therefore visions of wonder, fulfilling our passion as we see fit. I've spent my entire life developing skills, using resources available to enhance my ability to create art, knowing full well that it has all been done before. Despite how we now function in this pandemic era, adding ongoing challenges, I often wonder if I could have done better. Raising the bar to achieve on my terms what would be considered acceptable art. In doing so, there may be a question in how to validate this notion of what acceptable art is. If I have not confused you already, perhaps the answer may be that art is relative in respect to personal preference. In other words, what seems acceptable for some may not be for others. Most recently, I had an exhibition titled the Louis Melendez Exhibition at the YMCA in Warsaw, New York. The show was affiliated with the ACWC, acronym for Arts Council in Wyoming County, in conjunction with decentralization grant received earlier this past year. In doing so, my good friend and fellow guest artist named Walter Martin was also invited to share some of his work featured as well. My presentation is to demonstrate a process that I've discovered when reviewing a DVD titled Creating Dynamic Landscapes with John McDonald. His video is produced by Lilydale Art Instruction Videos, Modern Masters Series. In it, he describes his process using 5 elements: a composition, value structure, color relationships, edge, contrast, and details. It is a step-by-step logical procedure effective when doing portrait or landscape painting. At the same time, I was researching another video to understand the techniques of Carlos Santos, who is also represented by Lilydale Art Instruction Videos. The reason is that both artists offer 2 distinct styles that I found useful which dramatically improved my understanding that will be applicable when creating my own work of art. It is for this reason that I highly recommend that both Carlos Santos and John McDonald to be worth adding to your collection. Therefore, I've chosen the colors used by Carlos Santos due to his vast knowledge in rendering the human form. However, it is not what this presentation will be about. Instead, due to my limited resources and time availability, I've chosen to review John McDonald's insightful knowledge in how to produce a successful landscape painting. It is my wish to follow up with a portrait demonstration at some later time. Meanwhile, I encourage you to imagine that art is a journey that opens doors for artists and enthusiasts alike. It is an adventure in the imaginary sense for which we, who are among the living, will have opportunity to leave our mark on earth for other generations to see. And if you are one who finds pleasure in these things, then your journey with art is commendable. One encouraging note is that art does not discriminate with age, mentality, or talent you may possess, or even the amount of time you may have left. I highly recommend art for the reason that despite it being a good remedy in how you spend valuable time, it also provides satisfaction without hypnotic chaos trending in society. Imagine this. I know that not everyone is an artist, but if you are a senior citizen, retired, blessed with an urge to create art, then you are not alone. You could be someone on your island of paradise, and in that special place, you get to do what you enjoy most in your golden years with brush at hand, while fantasizing that you are a disciple from the Norman Rockwell Institute in the Garden of Eden. But putting fantasy aside, it may be impossible unless a conscientious effort is made to revamp the skills necessary when creating art on your terms. When I majored in art at the University of Potsdam, I also took interest in sculpture due to my ever-growing appetite to learn how to construct objects in three-dimensional form. There seemed no limit as to what materials to use when doing conceptual or figurative art. In the 80s, I've settled in a one-horse sleepy town called Perry, New York, and found employment at Champion Products on Tempest Street. I worked as a commercial artist in both sample and embroidery department for about 6.5 years, after which I spent years changing careers unrelated while attending as many workshops and evening classes when possible. And then, among my discovery, I found that art can be very soothing, personal, and gratifying when achieving the objective. In my case, I've needed to find a voice for each brushstroke on canvas or surface suitable for painting without giving up in search of what I would like to think of as being acceptable art. Using a clear method of procedure inspired by John McDonald in his video titled Creating Dynamic Landscapes. I have spent, moving on to the next page. So in my presentation, and for your viewing pleasure, I prepared a slideshow to demonstrate the steps I take when doing oil painting. As I mentioned earlier, my presentation will demonstrate a process for which John McDonald clearly explains his approach when painting. I was encouraged to learn that his procedure is logical and informative. When reviewing his video, he expressed that the process is not, again, for everyone, and I do agree. The process may not work for everyone, but it is possible to incorporate the bits and pieces that may fit the puzzle for artists looking to improve their method in creating art. My talent is based on years of trial and error, which continues to evolve, sending me on course painting from the archives of memories and experiences in the style of contemporary realism. As I paint and watch the process of my ideas materialize on canvas, I'm drawn to the notion that it is possible to express one's unique existence in a world we create for ourselves. For the record, I will not suggest that you create an elaborate setup nor buy all the bells and whistles from Michaels. Instead, I will admit that I've had a lot of luck when finding things for the studio from Goodwill, garage sales, and was left on the street. The presentation will demonstrate a recent painting using materials provided in part by the decentralization grant received. Before I begin, I will challenge you by asking, why call it acceptable art? In order to answer that, we will limit our search to when doing an oil painting. For beginners, Britannica gives the definition that oil painting is a type of painting produced by using oil-based paints. Oil painting involves using pigments that use a medium of drying oil as a binder and painting with them on a canvas. The most common types of oil in oil painting are linseed oil, walnut oil, poppy seed oil, and safflower oil. My approach for mixture is less toxic without the use of turpentine. Instead, I use 1/3 Gamblin refined linseed oil, 1/3 Damar varnish, and 1/3 odorless turpenoid. I also wear gloves when painting or cleaning out brushes to avoid chemical toxicity when possible. So let's begin to understand what an oil painting is. An oil painting involves a process. The process is no mystery. In fact, it's been around seemingly forever. The process of producing art has seen a lot of innovations, but frankly, it is not original. Artists throughout the world have developed ingenious ways to create and present their work in a tradition ever ongoing throughout the ages. I, for one, have developed methods in how to use my brushes when painting and having a collection of easels to boot, which includes one such easel, custom made for plein air. When working in a studio, I am fortunate to have a room filled with windows, which allows for maximum sunlight throughout the day. In other words, having a room of windows cannot be underestimated, and having houseplants will bear witness. In my arsenal, I use a vintage portable projector screen to help block out the unmerciful sun. Also, I have 2 combo lights positioned on each side throughout the painting process. The 2 combo lights use both a fluorescent circular cool light with a 60-watt soft light bulb, adequate for temperature balance and shadow control. My approach to painting begins with a vision based on an impression or experience that I may have had at some point, followed by a search to determine if whether my vision was fueled by a photo taken or something I saw. Then comes a decision about what the subject matter can be. It may also involve reading and borrowing ideas from others, as well as sharing what are no secrets. I also do photography, which gives me advantage for decision making based on reference material. At this point, we need to understand what photography can and will not do. Photography can offer a lot, but it is no match to the human eye. With photos, we have time to know about the image that can be painted. When doing so, it can spark a memory, which can help to shape the composition by way of value changes and color relationships, for which a camera cannot do. But with a camera, you have time to evaluate the temporary conditions recorded at that moment, which reveals value information. So in summary, a camera allows for time to study and contemplate what your painting should be. It can capture the fleeting, most temporary conditions allowable for evaluation. What a camera does not do is to give you a personal, intimate feeling in the essence of that moment. The many elements in a landscape, whether if it's the clouds, foliage, or how about the glimmering sparkle of light on water you saw down at the creek. A camera will not give you all the information, but it will allow for memory to work while you paint. It does not reach you on an emotional level from personal experience. Instead, it mechanically duplicates a moment in time, revealing valuable information, especially when photographing multiple exposures. Again, a camera allows time on your watch for study, so you may understand your subject before proceeding. It can capture subtle nuances which may not be achievable at a plein air event. But being outdoors, with weather permitting, you may witness the fleeting, menacing moments before you flinch. At this time, it seems contradicting when mentioning that you should work with several photos during the process. For my demonstration, I had only one photo to work from. One reason may be that I've spent a lot of time beforehand being on location when choosing and taking notes of my surroundings. But as mentioned, it's better to have more than one photo to work from. This way you get to select what value changes should your painting have. In short, a human eye is far more capable in capturing the subtle changes whereby a camera cannot do so. Instead, it will simplify the color and shift hue to compensate for exposure. It can also exaggerate contrast. One photo is never enough due to the latitude in range of exposure. And as you know, a camera has no consciousness, therefore, it will not speak to you when you paint. However, it can mimic, for example, when objects appear blur. I was mentioning this due to the fact that sometimes when you take a photo, if the exposure is not right and it's movement involved, that's when you have blur. On the other hand, when you are doing a plein air painting, you are living in the moment, being part of the environment, and with that comes emotional response, conveying the sensitivity when creating originality in your painting for which it deserves. To know the subject in a painting is to know how to present it. And yes, there are no secrets to painting or how you improve your skills. What matters is the 10,000 hours of practice, and in my specialty, retirement lends itself well without excuse of having no time. You also need to understand as much as possible the basics and process for painting. So if I were to ask, what are the basics? What would your answer be? The basics is when understanding how to focus on what are the important things to consider when painting. It is not something you watch while others do. It is you when you participate, when you paint. In other words, you may get to learn a lot from books, magazines, conventions, workshops, but eventually it's more about learning to paint by painting. The basics of painting consist of a construction that has parts and a process. But before that, there is a procedure whereby you must choose a scene and then ask, what is this about and why would I paint it? Then you gather your information and by way of taking multiple photos at different exposures or settings, followed by doing sketches and tonal studies. Even doing a plein air study will enlighten you to experience what a photo cannot do. Then you go back to the studio and do some editing by rearranging your reference material to achieve or to fit the narrative before painting. The parts of your painting can be anywhere from 4 up to 6 steps or sometimes more depending on the complexity. Again, there are no rules in how you paint. The parts we need to understand are the following. First on the list is composition. Composition is largely the foundation or base by which can either make or break your painting. A composition will use shapes of value forms in construction of things that will hold your audience attention. And for that to happen, it must have variety. It is also the most important element for the piece being created. If not, your audience will not see it. After composition comes value. There may be from 2 to 5 major value shapes that are prominent for light and dark in areas, followed by color relationships. Color relationship could be described with color temperature and value differences when considered. Then there are edges where two forms of a landscape meets and whether if that line will be soft or hard. All of that must happen before you have detail. So the process involves the steps of choosing a scene while asking yourself what will make you want to paint it. For myself, I will find and edit information that is valid. At times, I might even use a program, that is a computer program called Corel Photo Paint, to rearrange the composition from photos or sketches when necessary. Understand that this is not the only way. For example, doing thumb sketches might even work better at this stage of the process. One thing about Corel Photo Paint is that any reference material could make your work look too mechanical if you rely on it too much. In other words, your work can easily be mistaken as photorealism. For this presentation, I didn't use Corel Photo Paint as much due to the adequate amount of information gathered. Again, I say to you that painting is not learned by watching others do it, nor is it done by attending the best college, workshops, conventions, videos, etc. Painting is all about doing it yourself. It is based on the quality of value and visual information by way of the multiple photos taken using different exposures to evaluate value changes and color relationships you may have for your subject. However, when using a camera, it can give you too much information, putting your composition at risk unless you adopt the process of elimination to avoid clutter. A painting in itself will work when it's done in steps. In other words, the steps will be the process and how you will know if the composition will work for you. Knowing about color relationships and value changes cannot be achieved through the viewfinder of a camera, but a photo will allow you to answer, why would you ever want to paint it? To know that is to know the procedure. On the other hand, if you were to do a plein air painting, you would have to then be on location despite what the weather conditions are. Hopefully you would have chosen a nice day without the pouring rain, or how about a soft summer breeze that you can feel or paint? What colors would you use? Whether if it's sunny or that of blustering winds, capturing the moment with each brush stroke within minutes could be all you have. Then there is color. Color, as I imagine it, is exotic, or the aphrodisiac. It is the attention grabber, being a magnet for the viewer. But you must remember that in color there are color relationships, which in itself might explain in part why Sir Isaac Newton invented the color wheel. If you can fathom that, then you can create the subtle warm or cool differences while you paint. After color comes edges. This would be when two objects will meet, forming soft or hard lines between them. Finally, and not least, we have detail. Detail will challenge the artist who shows you everything. It can render every pearl and diamond with eccentricity so that you won't miss a thing within the amount of information given. Any detail can be one thing less for your audience to imagine. And if there's too much detail, then there's not much for your audience to engage with. To challenge your audience is to silently communicate what the painting can do in retrospect to emotional response. These parts of the process are not equal, but there is dominance in the order of how to construct a painting. After which we choose a way to transfer the drawing or image onto canvas as we copy. A procedure that works for me begins with a monochrome underpainting. A monochrome underpainting consists of a painting done in a single color or contrasting tones of a single color, such as in gray. In doing so, opportunity presents itself by showing where to place any value changes that can help balance the composition. So now let's talk about copying. There are those who will not copy, thinking that it will draw attention to the photo rather than what will be painted. And so, in the minds of skeptics, To create a painting is not to copy a photo. What you see is very different from a photo. To copy a photo will suggest that you can replicate what a camera can do. And in doing so, you have wasted a lot of time whereby it could have been done all in one click. In other words, a painter using a copy to paint from is only focused on that photo. As for myself, I used a photo to help retain my impression while being on Main Street for several days, positioning myself at different places before painting, followed by sketches and photocopy of a plein air painting done previously to refresh my memory. And while we're on the subject, this is what that painting was. For this presentation, I focused on using the historic water trough in Perry, New York. It was originally installed on Main Street in the year 1896. And then there was another one further down on Main Street. The troughs were used for horses before the invention of the automobile, after which they were removed and stored for decades for the purpose of preservation. Fast forward, in the year 2016, an effort was made by the Main Street Improvement Project saw to it that one trough be restored to its original location. Then in September of 2018, the ACWC launched their annual event of plein air titled The Pieces of Perry, which gave me the opportunity to evaluate any possible location whereby I could join other artists willing to paint in public on that weekend. My idea was that of choosing a place on Main Street where the sun would not shine, but because there was wall-to-wall sunshine on that beautiful Saturday, I was fortunate to have a camera umbrella positioned right next to my easel, providing adequate shade. The collection of photos gathered for this presentation will show the process from beginning to end based on one of my most recent oil paintings titled The Trough on Main Street in Perry. The purpose will show how an illustration can blossom into a memorable painting inspired by a plein air event. So, let's begin that presentation or that slideshow. This is the inside of my studio in Gainesville. This photo was taken as I was working on the trough on Main Street in Perry. The studio setup was formulated over time based on trial and error. It was developed using anything practical found at either Goodwill garage sales or anywhere else. I even found 3 favorite 3-inch PVC bar tables on wheels across from our house waiting for garbage pickup. And with those tables, I would never have to sit again while I paint. Then there are stores that ran out of business for which I got tremendous deals on art supplies. Over time, my vision to have a functional studio became reality. The room receives an abundant amount of light throughout the day. When it's sunny and there's too much light entering, I then resort to my trusty vintage portable projector screen to diffuse the light, which can blind me from seeing the actual colors on my palette. Okay, as mentioned earlier, the Blended event availed the opportunity to share my weekend with other artists painting in public. This is the annual event, with exception that we did not have it this past October due to the Letchworth Arts and Crafts Show being held in Perry, New York. before I go further, this photo here shows you the actual finished piece for the presentation. With diligent effort made, the ACWC launched in action, reaching its goal and seeing it become a success. I may have gone ahead of myself a little bit here, but that's okay. Okay, as I've already mentioned, this is the actual photo used for reference. This photo is poorly, or that it this photo this photo poorly shows what the actual painting looked like after the plein air event. Again, I show you the same thing here, which is what you see on screen. For some unexplainable reason, this photo appeared completely washed out. The story behind it is that it took some planning before heading out in public. Nevertheless, I painted it on my homemade portable easel. The easel itself is custom built by using 2x4s, which can be transformed into a cart wagon or painting easel with a panel board for the purpose of using it for mixing paint on my color palette. The easel was modified to fit in a Costco wheel cart that my wife, Kathy, bought me for Christmas. And yes, how cool is that? Again, the goal was to be able to set up in public without fear that it would all fall apart. And when I took it out, I thought it would be all the rave, when in fact I don't think anyone noticed it. That same year, a reception was given at the Hole in the Wall, located on Stamp Pike Road near Silver Lake in New York, whereby I'd learned that my plein air painting had sold. What was interesting is that I was more about presenting something without thought if the check was in the mail. Also, I was glad to learn that it was sold to the right people, which now hangs on their wall. Again, prior to the plein air event, I'd made time for research by using reference material to help evaluate the elements for composition. And as it was mentioned earlier, I found that the only photo I had was adequate enough. What helped was taking time to study the environment as well as what the subject matter should be. Okay, this is, as you now see this, there's another procedure to consider. It would be to use 3/4 inch staples to produce custom stretch canvases cut to size using pine strips for structural support in the way how stretch canvas is made. Then I transferred the drawing using a grid method. I started this painting by using a detailed pencil drawing on a 14 by 22 sheet of white heavyweight board, which you can find in the craft section at Walmart. By using a grid method, I was able to transfer the image onto a 13 by 17 homemade stretch cotton canvas. The measurement of canvas was deliberate, without relying on Michael's selection of sizes. The particular measurement was for the purpose to allow the subject to look appropriate from where the viewer may be standing. As you see, I've already started by using a thin hair King Art original gold brush dipped in raw umber to follow the marks on canvas based from a well-detailed drawing. At this point, I would like to say that years of drawing and studies from models and nature itself is an important element or exercise that can improve the quality of anyone's work regardless of style or choice of medium. It is it also supports the fact that a well-detailed drawing is paramount for any successful painting. What works for me is when having the luxury of time with sketchbook at hand to record my experiences when being alone, to do as many drawings, which is my testament from observation. This is a glimpse in the process of applying raw umber in both the line rendering and areas of shadow. The goal is not to get ahead with detail while preserving the integrity of the drawing. Again, it is a successful a successful painting is based on good composition. At this point, a well-balanced composition is carefully structured to enhance the drawing in its final stages. Notice too that the canvas appears slightly warm with cool temperature throughout the canvas. It is due in how the combo lights reflects on the surface, creating a warm glow varying in temperature from left to right on canvas. This might have worked if it wasn't for the fact that the actual appearance of the canvas did not show this anomaly, proof that a camera may not give you true coloring. Adding to this, I made the mistake of not toning the entire canvas before the first layer of underpaint. This is showing how I've applied a light wash tone over wet paint by using burnt umber, which surprisingly gave the effect of gust or blowing wind. This was not the effect I was hoping for, but I left it thinking that further painting would cover it. Nevertheless, it was a lesson to learn. What would have been more desirable is to tone the canvas by using a flat brush to apply a thin layer of burnt umber and then letting it dry before the first underpainting. This would have set the mood of the composition. You will also notice that there are hints of color on detail. This became the experiment in hope to easily identify the areas of color. Instead, it felt like a headache was coming on and a trap for rendering detail before value changes were established. As you see, areas in the background are being darkened to allow for depth and perception. The latter part was something I've learned when taking an evening course in technical drawing from a community college, which gave me appreciation for architectural structure. And then the foliage took on a life its own with continual shadows descending onto the trough. The diagonal shift of value changes sloping downward made the base appear, in my opinion, more dimensional. A close-up at this stage shows how there may be mistakes in objects or in how to relate to the other elements of composition. If there are mistakes, then it's up to the artist to decide will it compromise or solidify the overall appearance to the finished piece. My advice is that you deal with it for better or worse. Under no circumstance should you allow any mistakes to go unchecked. In oils, using white paint to cover over mistakes can act like an eraser, as it can also create soft gray smudges due to unsettled wet areas. These mistakes are not always detrimental. After all, when using oils, you may find that mistakes can inadvertently add quality when least expected, or you could add more coats of some other color to compensate. A word of advice is that you should stop if you feel that you may be overworking it. Now I'm blocking in colors with underpainting for the background and of the trough on its island in gray tone. The slight variation in tone has been sculpted to hint the difference between the vase and to that of the floral arrangement which will soon appear. The trough and base is now formally drawn with minor adjustments. The limbs of the tree and foliage must well be balanced as it is being integrated in front of the building stacked in the background. As you may see, the curvature of the oversized vase is in stark contrast to the granite trapezoid on solid ground featuring the object of interest. After doing the first undercoat, I would compare the value range to determine what would be the next object to paint. My strategy will follow the form of visual shapes suggesting design within the elements. At this juncture, some tweaking may take place in order to weed out mistakes. This must happen before any detail is given. Also, it is challenging when attention to detail is begging for center stage, whether before or after the first undercoat. And if you were in my shoes or a man of fate, then when in doubt, remember not to lead yourself into temptation. At this point, detail is added, suggesting that it took endless hours to complete, when in the contrary, having a systematic approach using the steps described in the process would prove to be more viable. This concludes my presentation, as I hope it has given you ideas in how you could approach your painting experience with satisfaction. Finally, and again, I would like to thank everyone, family and friends, who took time out of their busy schedule to attend the Louis Melendez exhibition at the YMCA in Warsaw, New York. Also to the entire staff of ACWC in affiliation with the Decentralization Grant, and with much gratitude and special thanks to ACWC President Gary Pujol, Executive Director Jacqueline Swaby, Community Grant Coordinator Linda Frank, for their knowledge, encouragement, and their patience in making this possible. Also to my lovely wife Kathy Melendez for her undeniable support without insanity when I transformed our dining room to serve this project. And one other thing, I'd like to thank my daughter Maria for helping me put this together, because she's the one who's actually helping me film it. Again, I thank you.